It's so cool to be here. Lana, you said y'all twice in that talk. Now, I'm just telling you, buddy, I got a cowboy hat waiting for you, and you just need to come to Texas, buddy. You'll slide in and fit like that's pretty special right there. I've got 6 million things I'd like to talk about. For those that I haven't met, a lot of you I know. For those that I haven't met, my name is Myers Raymer. I'm a very grateful recovered alcoholic, now living in Central Texas, down around Kerrville, Texas, which is in the middle of nowhere. It's goats and cedar trees and me. It's just pretty in the middle of nowhere out here. I sobered up January 15th, 88, and I just can't tell you how cool it is. Let me tell you why this is so special to me. I've been excited about this for weeks and weeks, because over the last 25 years, I've spent so much time watching AA culture and the things that we move towards and the things that we move away from and the things that we think are important and the things that we don't give a rat's rear about. It shifts depending on, usually it comes down to what you've been taught. And so I want to slide into this sideways a little bit. I want to talk about this much about some other stuff about how I started this, because it affected so much about how I look at everything else. The things I see today, I look at completely different than I did 34 years ago. Completely different. I'm a classic poster boy for just don't drink and go to meetings. I know every little aphorism off the wall. Think, just don't drink. I know all of that, but I don't know anything about the literature. And so pretty much every day, I'm going to 6 meetings a week, and almost every day I'm getting fed information that I have no way to clarify whether it's real or not. You all ever heard things in AA that you just went, now that can't be real? Well, I just took, if it was a nice person and they were sitting in an AA meeting, that what they said was important and I needed to work it into my knowledge, so to speak. And as a result, I got more and more confused about what AA was, what AA's purpose was, what recovery looked like, so much confusion. And I still see it today, and I'm a big proponent of book studies. That's how we get the clarity. I was 7 years sober and a suicidal mess, and I didn't even know who the co-founders of Alcoholics Anonymous were. And if it had not been for the kindness of an old crusty guy named Cliff Bishop, who would tell me the truth about this stuff, I would have crashed and burned. I would be dead or locked up today. I certainly wouldn't be married, and I certainly wouldn't have a business, and I certainly wouldn't have 3 sweetheart daughters. I wouldn't have any of that. So I understand that when we get sober, things can get better for a while. And for 2 or 3 years, 2 years for sure, things did get better. I got things at home settled down. We had another baby girl. I'm showing up for work. I'm okay. I seem to be fine. By the end of the 3rd year or the 4th year, I'm starting to do some weird things. I'm starting to I'm eating too much. I'm spending way too much money. I'm doing all of these things. And the only reason I'm taking up your time that we're talking about this is I want you to understand, how many of y'all have ever sponsored somebody that got clear of the booze and the addiction stuff, the dope or whatever it was? They got clear of that. And then later it began to manifest some weird stuff someplace else. Now they're twisted up in sex stuff, or they're twisted up in overeating stuff, or spending, or you name it, like that. Years later, somebody said, Myers, didn't you ever understand that restless, irritable, and discontent might come back if you weren't working the program? And I've said, it never even occurred to me. I have the Grapevine magazine, supposedly our meeting in print, where the cover says, just don't drink and go to meetings. So, I mean, that's all I need to know, right? Well, I couldn't have been more wrong. I should be awarded for being the guy that has treated AA with no real respect or dignity, and I just flat settled for less. If I can keep myself sober, and that's the way I always put it, if I can keep myself sober one day at a time, I'm going to be okay. And we're sold that bill of goods in the talking heads, and all the people that are out there that are not involved with our organization will talk about that stuff. And I just, golly, guys, I couldn't have gotten it goofier. We were laughing the other day. I was so excited when I finally got sober, I could take a check ride with an FAA guy and get a pilot's license, which I had always wanted to do. And so I get a pilot's license, and then I got to buy an airplane, because renting them's expensive. Well, buying them is 3 times more expensive, but at least you got the airplane. It's yours, okay? So I bought the airplane, and then a year later, it wasn't big enough, so I got another one, and then a little bit later, I bought another one. And so now I'm 5 years in sobriety. I'm kind of coming apart. I'm kind of nutty, and I own 3 airplanes, 2 aircraft hangars, and all this crap that goes with it. And I'm broke. I got no money at all, because it's all funneling into all of that stuff like this. Am I the only y'all never did that? Did y'all never? Lana, come on, don't lie to me, girl. Did you ever buy clothes you didn't wear? Yes. And buy music that I don't listen to. I'm buying tools. I don't even know what they are. And it's just scratching this itch, and I don't quite understand what all that's about, you know? And so 5 years in, the depression comes back, and the depression is kicking me to the mat. My wife is now fairly scared. My daughters, it's a weird feeling at night when you open the door after a meeting, and I would open the door at home, and I could hear my little kids running down the hallway in the opposite direction. They're running to the other end of the house because they don't know who's coming home. Is it the good old Dad Myers, or is it the Marquis de Sade, complete with throwing book bags and acting like a total idiot? And it's sad to admit how many nights I came home like that. Emotionally, I'm coming apart at the seams, and I'm not connecting it to anything because nobody in my meetings are talking about it. With 32 meetings a week in that group and no book studies. 32 meetings. And when Chris, my evil twin brother, when Chris, who saved my life twice in AA, the second time he saved it, he took me and introduced me to Cliff Bishop. Cliff Bishop was sponsored by Joe McQuaney of Joe and Charlie. And so you can kind of tell where this is going. It was just, he might as well have been talking Turkish. I didn't understand anything that they were talking about like that. And I would sit there and I'm going, when can I share? I share. I get to share, don't I? And they said, no, you don't get to share, Myers, because you don't know what you're talking about. And I said, no, but I've had a really hard day at work, and I've got lots of stuff to talk about the disappointments of today. And he goes, no. This is a book study, and that's not what it's for. We talk about that later if you want to. And I just didn't get it. Well, eventually, I want to tell you what happened eventually. Eventually, one night, there was a little gal named Dara that was chairing that meeting, and she started saying something, and I went, I know exactly what to say. And I raised my hand like that. I went, like this. I'm trying to get her to look at me so she'll call on me so I can share. Guys, I've been there long enough. I should know that that's not the kind of meeting. It's a book study. And finally, Clifford had enough, and I will never forget it. He walked past me, got up, and he walked towards me, and I thought he was going to pat me on the shoulder and say, "Nice chair." But or nice share, but he didn't. He just laid a little note on the table, and it slipped off the table and hit me in the lap. And I looked down and I grabbed it and I opened it up, and it said, "Why don't you shut up until you know what's in that book?" And I was devastated. Here was a guy that was supposed to be my sponsor who had just spanked me in front of that whole group, even though they didn't know what was on the thing. And I got up and I left, and there was a cat named Phil that stopped me at the door, and he said, "Come on, sit back down, buddy." He said, it's some of us have gotten that note too, and you'll live through it. Just stay here." You see, that close, if I'd have been outside, I never would have come back, and I never would have understood what this whole thing was about. But I took his advice, and I shut up, and I just started listening, and I started working the steps for the first time. I'm 7.5 years in the rooms, and I'm finally doing inventory. I'm finally working the steps. I got through it. I had an amazing experience, and things just got pretty sweet. Things began to change so quickly. We had another baby girl, and things were super. I want to tell you that in the early days of Primary Purpose Group, there were a handful of folks that wanted to do this book study, and we were using a book that was produced by Joe McQuaney at his little treatment center in Arkansas. And when we did for years, we used that little book. The problem is that it only went up to chapter 7, working with others. And so they were just using it in treatment. And then by then the people were getting ready to leave. And so Clifford kept saying, "Hey, Joe, why don't you rewrite this thing? Rewrite it so that we can all get involved and we can do the whole book." And Joe said, "No way." Yeah, I said, I don't have time to do it. And Clifford was looking at me one evening, and he said, you reckon we could write a study guide? And I went, "Buddy, I got 14 employees and all this stuff going on. Again, I don't have time to scratch my skinny Texas rear. I don't have time to do any of this kind of stuff, but I can make sure we get it published." And he said, "Well, okay, you reckon Londa could proof it?" And I went, "Yeah, that's my wife, the Queen Bee." And so they did. And so he started writing, and we started checking it and proofing it. And then we got it up and running. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is that there's so often that this thing could have gone south. We could have gotten discouraged and just said, "Well, we're not going to do it anymore." Or we could have, we were getting lots of pushback from Dallas, from the people in the Dallas area like this. Matter of fact, if you call the Dallas Intergroup office and you said, "Hey, I'm looking for a book study kind of in the Midway Hills area like this," they'd say, "Well, there's no book studies over there. But if you wait until 8:00, this group down the street right there has got a great discussion meeting, and you could go to that meeting." And I just went, "Well, okay." They wouldn't recognize Primary Purpose Dallas as a bona fide AA group because we didn't have a discussion meeting. The fact that we just had a book study, they would not recognize us. New York did, but the local folks wouldn't. Guys, you realize how weird that is? That we have an opportunity to learn what Bill and Bob in the first 100 intended for us to get out of that text. The directions, the promises, the prayers, the reoccurring themes, all of this stuff is in that book. And we couldn't study it because of the pressure. And I mean, it was serious. You'd say something, if you were in another group and you said something about the group you went to, they'd roll their eyes and look at you and go, "Oh, it's that group." Crazy. That's the reason why today, when I get an opportunity to talk at an anniversary for a Primary Purpose Group or a book study where people are focusing on the text, it makes me giddy with excitement because you're in a position to do what we all wanted to do, but so few of us ever did, which was affect change in the lives of other people. And this is why this stuff got to be so magic. Over the years, well, let me tell you this first because it was sort of weird like that. Clifford said, "Why don't we produce 30 study guides?" we'll produce 30 of them, and then that'll carry the group over for a long time, and then we'll be done. And I said, deal, I'll do it. And so I built 30 study guides, and 2 weeks later, we were sitting there after a meeting, and we were putting stuff up, and this guy walks up and he said, hey, we've got a halfway house in Louisiana, and they are thinking that maybe, I'm just thinking sitting here in this meeting tonight that maybe it would be really cool if we could do this. Could you sell me some of these study guides? And the guy said, how many you want? He said, I want 20 of them. And Clifford looked at me, and I looked at Clifford, and I shook my head. No, like, no, don't go down that road, man. And he said, find out how much we'd have to do, how many we'd have to print to get a decent price on them. And it was 200. They had just come out with digital printing, and it was a weird deal. But we found a company that would print us 200 of them for a reasonable price. And so I told Clifford, I said, Clifford, if we get stuck with these, because we're talking $2,000 or $3,000 at that time. And I said, if we get stuck with these, it's going to be and he said, Myers, don't worry about it. If we get stuck with them, I'll buy them. And I said, deal. And there we went. We went ahead and did it. Now, the only reason I tell you that is because I stopped counting them about 3 years ago. But 3 years ago, we had sold over 17,000 of them at our cost, 17,000 of them. And we always sold them for our cost. You can buy them for almost $70 on Amazon. They have folks buying them from us at cost and then selling them on Amazon. But but here's the point, because I look at my own experience, and I look at how transformed I was when I began to start connecting up the dots. And some of you guys like Michael and Yale and Will, some of y'all that have been around a lot of these book studies before, you remember, like I do, what it was like to move from, hi, my name is Yale, and I'm staying sober one day at a time. From that camp to a camp over here where we have recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body, that we stay sober for good and for all, but we live life one day at a time. I'm not ragging on the idea that we live life a day at a time, but this idea that our efforts are about staying sober one day at a time, guys, it's never been in our literature until it was later put in some brochures and that piece of crap, Living Sober, which I don't. We'll have to get another hour talk just on that damn book. It drives me insane. But anyway. But here's the deal that's important. There have today been tens of thousands, untold thousands of people that have been affected because we stopped being just a place to dump your problem. It's okay if you want to dump your problems in certain meetings. That's the reason we have so many of those meetings. But if you want to get healthy, if you want to live a life truly free of the bondage of that alcoholism, the best way to figure out a way to do that is to get involved in book studies. And not only will it help you on your own recovery, obviously, but it'll also take you to a place to where you're able to help other people. You see? I mean, so Will says, Myers, would you sponsor me? And I go, yeah, Will, just don't drink and go to meetings. And Will goes, what else? Nothing, Will, just don't drink and go to meetings. You see how ridiculous that is? It makes us look like idiots. We have this program that is so amazingly profound, and yet we have a sea of people worldwide who just simply don't know how to move somebody from point A to point B. I don't think I've ever done a talk lately that I haven't talked about Don Pritz just for a second or two. He's one of my all-time heroes. If you've never listened to any of these old talks that Don Pritz did, he's been dead for years. He sobered up in the federal penitentiary system in Denver, Colorado, in the central United States. And he just had a way of carrying the message and teaching this stuff. He was truly, truly blessed with the ability to connect with folks. And a lot of the heavy hitters in the United States that grew out of that their lineage all went up through Don Pritz. And one of these stories that he did in the 70s, now stop and think about how long ago that was. In the 70s, Don's talking about He said, the thing that discourages me, that I am concerned about, is that these days we seem to always talk about sobriety, but we don't talk about recovery. But think about what I just said, y'all, because here it is. There's a huge difference in being sober and being recovered. In the words of my buddy Mickey Bush, so's the cat. I mean, just being sober today doesn't mean anything. You can still be a train wreck of a man or a woman by just staying sober one day at a time. When you're talking about recovery, you're talking about a whole nother world. You're talking about this idea of standing in the sunlight of the Spirit. You're talking about heady stuff that's just sort of amazing like that. It's a completely different deal. This is early on when I'm talking about selling us short, when we sell our program short. I talk to parents all the time that are here. I talk to patients in treatment centers, do a lot of 12-step work in treatment centers, and I'm blown away by how many of them are so ingrained with this idea that being sober is just a day-to-day thing, that we just stay sober one day at a time. But they don't look at the bigger picture, and we're going to talk about it because I cannot not talk about it. And this isn't, I don't, somebody the other day said, Myers, you might have spanked them a little hard. I said, I don't, my intention is never to be, I don't want to spank anybody. It's not my job to spank anybody. But I spent years in AA unhappy. I spent years struggling in these rooms. And could I blame it on everybody else? Yeah, I tried to. But at some point, you have to just own it. I'm too lazy to pick up a book. I'm too uncertain of what I'm supposed to do. And nobody was helping me see a path. And so I just was settled and satisfied with just going to a meeting every day and trying to stay sober. But that's why you have so many people in these rooms that end up not staying. Remember now, statistically, guys, we have never, from day one, have we ever had a problem getting people to come to AA? But we've had a ton of problems getting people to stay because they don't hear what they need to hear. They don't hear the true message. They don't hear the prayers and the promises and the directions and all of the things that Bill Wilson and those folks wanted us to hear. And this is the reason why the only way that's going to happen is if you make up your mind to take the text and get rid of the old ideas and the old prejudice, the old contempt, get rid of all of that stuff and start new and just simply look at it through a new pair of glasses, so to speak. And you'd be amazed how different the program begins to look. Crazy. The other day, how many of you guys have ever heard of this cat named Alan McGinnis? Will, you probably have, and Michael, I bet you have too. The Alan McGinnis was an early, I say early AA member. This was like in the 60s. He did a talk for a conference, and they recorded the talk. And then later they took the recording of that talk and transcribed it and made a brochure out of it that's still available in the General Service Office called A Member's Eye View of AA. And if you get a second, you can get it in any intergroup office or on online. It's available like that. I want to read you one paragraph on this thing, and I'll read it and then I'll explain why I'm reading it after I get done. There's a widely held belief in AA that if a newcomer will simply continue to attend meetings, something will finally rub off on you. And the implication, of course, is that the something which rubs off will be the so-called miracle of AA. Now, there is no doubt in my mind that many people in AA accept this statement quite literally. I have observed them over the years. They faithfully attend meetings, faithfully waiting for something to rub off. The funny part about it is there is something rubbing off: death. They sit there week after month after year while mental, spiritual, and physical rigor mortis slowly sets in. Ouch. I mean, I just kind of took one in the chin on that. Guys, that's my experience. that's my experience sitting in AA like this. I'm expecting the fellowship and the good times and the nicest people I've ever met on earth sitting in those meetings. I'm expecting all that to keep me sober. And the reality of it is that it will for a little while. But how many of y'all have ever gone to a meeting for a long period of time and got so tired of hearing people telling the same story over and over again, and you just get wore out like that? It's just tough. Alan McGinnis wrote that 60 years ago. 60 years ago, they were trying to warn us. They were trying to tell us that there was more than just going to a bunch of meetings, that there was more to what recovery actually looked like. I want to tell you a real quick story. I don't think I've told this story in years, but I think you guys will get it because you're the nature of your meeting and what you're trying to do. And one of the things that comes hand in hand with book studies is there's a kind of a common thread that runs through everybody sitting in a book study. There's a point where we go, well, why am I doing this? And then pretty soon we begin to realize that the reason we're doing this is so we can carry the message. That Bill Wilson's idea of step 12 was not kind of, you can do it if you want to, or you can just pass it up if you want to. That's not what he intended. Every member of us, if we wanted that big time change in who we were, we needed to go ahead and jump in there and do that, carrying the message. And so most book studies, once they start studying the text, will also start, in the United States, they call them H&Is, but what they are is just 12-step opportunities to go carry the message at treatment centers and jails and wind-up joints and, halfway houses, any place that drunks and little dope fiends show up like that, to go carry the message. It is unbelievable how transforming it can be to your whole life. Because let me tell you, left on your own devices, most of us will find 100 excuses not to carry the message. 100. I mean, I'm too busy. I'm too stupid. I'm too this. I'm too that. we're just not going to do it like that. I'm going to go to a meeting, and if somebody wants some help, they'll ask for help. Well, great. Have you ever thought of statistically how many people don't ever make it to AA? They get out of treatment, they get out of a detox someplace, and they flounder for 2 or 3 days, and the madness comes back on them, and they're back out there doing the crazy stuff again like that. They never made it to AA. This idea that tens of thousands of people every year get sober and don't get to AA. This is the reason why in our group in Dallas, like that, we had 52 commitments a week carrying the message other places. Stop and think about that, y'all. 52 commitments a week to carry the message to jails and treatment centers and wind-up joints and this kind of stuff. And there were literally thousands of people that were getting a chance to hear the clear message of Alcoholics Anonymous that might not have ever had an opportunity to do that. And this is the reason why I'm such a big fan of jumping in there and getting busy and doing that kind of stuff. I want to tell you this quick story about Terry. There's a place called Homeward Bound in Oak Cliff, which is kind of fancy schmancy now, but in the day it used to be gangsters and I mean it was a kind of a dark area. Just really a lot of weird stuff going on and a lot of dope and a lot of crazy stuff going on. And they built this little treatment center for indigents that was there. People would come in right in off the street, and that's where I went to carry the message for years and years and years. And when I got in there one night, and there's this kid in there that looked like he'd literally been beat with a tire tool. I mean, his face was all distorted. He had red hair. He looked like kind of like a clown. Excuse me, big red hair sticking out everywhere. He'd come in right in off the street. He'd been sleeping in the back of a pickup that was parked between two buildings, and had been there for 20 years. He was sleeping in there, and some crazy guys pulled him out of there and pulled him out of the back of it one night. And the problem is that Terry, this guy, he was laying face down, and when they pulled him out, the first thing that hit the ground was his face, and it broke his teeth out and broke his nose and broke his jaw, and it was a mess. And he's standing in there. Guys, I literally did that talk that night. I was doing book study stuff, and I literally did the talk that night like this, looking away from him because he was that freaky looking. And so after the meeting, he turns up right in front of me, and he starts talking, and I can't understand him. And this guy standing next to him said, he wants to know if you'll be his sponsor. And I went, of course he does. Yeah, thank you, God. I'm thinking about this is crazy. But I go ahead and sponsor this guy, and we get through the work. 3 or 4 weeks, we were completely finished, and he was doing some stuff. And he came up to me one night, and he said, I had this deal with him. I said, if you can get to the meeting, I'll get you home. Because getting home at night is the hard part, because there's no buses running back up in that part of town. And so he said, okay. And so I said, he's sitting in a meeting, and he said, Myers, can you loan me $20? And I said, yeah. What do you need it for? And he said, it's work stuff. Don't worry about it. And I said, okay. And so he leaves, and a couple of days later, he's back at the meeting, and he's got these buckets full of window washing tools. And I said, what's this? And he said, check this out. And he holds up this little business card, and he started a little window washing service, and he's up there all day washing windows and doing kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, all right, this is pretty cool like that. And but he's also getting really tight with a bunch of members of our group. He's sponsoring people. Now, I mean, I was 7 years, almost 9 years sober before I sponsored one guy. And here he is sober about 45 days, and he's already sponsoring 2 or 3 of these little guys from treatment stuff. And it just sort of freaks me out how cool it was to watch him change like that. And so anyway, he works with me for a while, and then ends up getting a job driving commercial trucks across country. And to make a long story short, because I want to finish up with some other stuff, but he ended up starting a bunch of AA groups in different parts of the country, where he's driving through. He'd call me and he'd say, hey, can you send me some big books? I want to start a big book study up here. They don't have one. And I'm going, well, are you sure anybody wants to do that? He said, oh, I've got a little army up here. I'm ready to go on this kind of stuff. I said, well, all right, we'll do that. And there is no telling how many book studies he started up in there. Guys, I tell you this for one reason. We have a sea of men and women, tens of thousands, who won't do anything to start a book study, to try to do some stuff. I understand that it takes effort. I understand what it takes. At some point in time, I think most of us who are doing this work recognize that there are a lot of people that would be different in recovery if they knew what the truth about recovery was. And the only way they're going to get that is if we teach it. And I mean, there was an old saying years ago, we teach what we're taught. And I get that. I mean, if all you do is just go to discussion meetings, I get that. That's what you're going to teach. There's nothing wrong with that. If you can keep the confusion at bay. And the problem is you end up with so much confusion. Let me ask you a question. How many of y'all in this room tonight, how many of y'all have ever listened closely in a meeting and began to pick out how much confusion there was about what people were saying? I mean, I'm not being mean to anybody. I'm just saying I get that. I get that. And this is where the confusion comes from, that later sets us up in this weird sort of a position. In one meeting, because they're all nice people. It's not like you're listening and this guy says, hey, this is no race, man. We need to take our time to do the work. And then the next guy that shares saying, based on what the text says, I think we're supposed to work the work in a kind of a timely fashion, maybe 30 or 40 days. And Will is sitting in the meeting for the first time, and he's just looking around the room going, okay, what's the truth? And it magnifies from that, y'all. It just magnifies. You'll hear people saying all kinds of stuff, and they don't mean anybody any harm. One of the most respected ladies I ever met in AA pulled me aside after a meeting years ago. I was 4 years sober, maybe at the time. She pulled me aside after a meeting and she said, "Myers, I got to tell you, I never worked any of those steps, and I've been sober for 17 years." I said, "No kidding. What? How did you do that?" And she looked like this, and she looked, and she goes, "Yoga." I went, "No kidding." And she said, "Yeah, yoga." And I'm not ragging on yoga. I practiced it religiously for 10 years. I love that stuff. I do. But do you understand the confusion? Here I am sitting here going, okay, I can work the steps and they make me feel uncomfortable, or I can go practice yoga with a bunch of sweaty women. And y'all understand it's an easy decision to make. I'm just going to go do that. Well, this is why it gets goofy. The basic text set a baseline over there like that. If you got a book there like that, I think your page numbers are going to be different, Michael. But on page 17 in our book, the feeling of having shared in a common peril. This is on There Is a Solution. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us, but that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined. Now, Bill just said the fact that our stories, we can relate back and forth. I'm never saying that your story is not important. If I'm talking to Will like that, and we better be able to relate on a gut level around this addiction stuff, we better be able to relate. Otherwise, I'm not going to listen to him, and he's not going to listen to me. That part of it's important. But look at what Bill says next. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we've discovered a common solution. The common solution is the steps. It's the program of action that we work. It's what they ask us to do. And this is the reason why the only way you're going to know it is to study it. It's the only way to do it. But what we don't tell people, and I think that we need to, as lovers of our basic text, I think what we need to be telling people is how important this stuff is, and pull them with a vision of what the payoff is. Because let me just tell you something, guys. The payoff is clarity around what it is that I need to tell you that might change the course of your whole existence. You see, I don't need to shoot from the hip and be funny. I don't need to be, witty. I don't need to be smart. I don't need to be any of that stuff. What I need to be is sober. That helps. But I also need to be able to describe how Bill Wilson laid this stuff out. And I'm telling you, the first 100, they knocked it out of the park in terms of how they laid this stuff out. Y'all ever stop and think, on a side note, did y'all ever stop and think what it would have been like if they had just mixed the chapters up? I mean, there was some logic in why they set things up the way that they did, like that, so that you would be spiritually fit to do at a third step. I mean, listen, go read from the ABCs over to the third step prayer, where Bill Wilson stops talking about alcoholism completely, doesn't even mention it. And he introduces us to this weird ass idea, completely weird, that selfishness and self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our problem. No, dude, you got it wrong. Canadian whiskey and later methamphetamines is what got me in trouble. I'm just telling you like that. That's what caused my problem. And then they introduce us to this fourth step. And we get to do a fourth and a fifth step, and we get our eyes opened up. Sometimes we get our face rubbed in the ugliness of how selfish and self-centered we really are, how prideful we really are, how many of y'all have ever realized that pride played a big old role in the thing? Between pride and fear, I don't know what motivated me more to make stupid mistakes. And when they said pride, I said, wait a minute, I don't look in the mirror. I mean, all you got to do is look at me and know I don't spend much time looking in the mirror. I don't. And that's not what Bill Wilson was talking about. When Bill was talking about pride, he was talking about how other people see me. And that stung. because I could immediately see how many decisions I made. How many times did I say things based on how I wanted other people to perceive me? We see it all the time. How many of y'all have ever been in a group conscience meeting or a business meeting, and you're voting on things for the group, and you hang back and wait to see how your homies vote first? And if all their hands are going up, I'm in. You see, we're not looking at what's right. We're looking at what's easy. And that's the big deal. That speaks volumes to the inauthenticity of who you are. And guys, I'm telling you, you will quickly realize that booze is the least of our problems sometimes. What is the real problem is that we are truly inauthentic stage characters who only care about how we're perceived and whether or not you do what I want you to do when I want you to do it. That's classic selfishness and self-centeredness. And when we realize that, when we recognize that, it makes us feel really uncomfortable, and we will move quickly to step 6 and 7, and we will be more than willing to identify that as objectionable and then ask God to remove it. I was having breakfast one time with Cliff Bishop and Joe McQuaney, and Joe looked at me and he said, I don't know if you all ever saw a picture of Joe when he was alive, but he's a really tall black dude with but huge. I mean, his frame was just great big, real intimidating like that. He had hands as big as a baseball glove. When I shook hands with him, it was like he was shaking hands with a 4-year-old kid. I mean, a big guy. And Joe looked at me and he said, Myers, he said, how much do you think self-will plays in your getting better in AA? And I said, oh, a lot. He said, really? And I said, yeah, I do. And he said, so you think that if you see that you're selfish, that you could exert more self-will and be less selfish? I said, yes, sir, exactly. I just need more willpower. And I remember him sitting back like this, and he looked at Clifford and he took a deep breath and he goes, good luck. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, you couldn't have it more wrong. And I went, are you serious? And he said, Myers, willpower has got nothing to do with this. Nothing. In the beginning, your willingness to do the work is really important. But this idea that you could will yourself, if you could will yourself, you will already willed yourself sober. You would have already done all that. You're heading down a dead end road, buddy. And I said, so then what does it come to? Where is it? He said, Myers, this stuff always comes to two things. And he said, if you're listening to me, you might get a pencil out because I know you might want to write it down. And I said, just tell me what it is. And he said, this whole program comes down to two things. How much time are you spending with God? How much time are you spending with God's kids? And I looked at Clifford and I laughed. And I just snorted at him and I just laughed. And I said, it's got to be more than that. And he said, no, he's dead right. He said, you can make this really complicated, but I'm telling you right now, you see somebody that relapses and you talk to them for a second like that. And everybody wants to ask these questions. Well, how many meetings were you going to? Well, how many of this? Well, blah, 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 all this. And I'm going, what? Stop. Quit asking that stuff. Because what Joe McQuaney and Cliff Bishop said was absolutely true. How much time I'm spending with God, is my relationship with my Creator getting deeper, broader, richer, or is it just stagnant and flat? Is your prayer life, God help me today as I back out of the driveway, I'm that poster boy, that's me, you see, or is it something that's getting richer? And the other part of that is, how much time are you spending with God's kids? Clifford said, Myers, the most important day of your life in recovery, the most important day is going to be the day that you realize that the reason you're here is to feed, not be fed. And I kind of backed up and listened to him for a second. And I went, you know what? You're right. You're absolutely right. Because left on my own devices, I don't want to feed anybody. Because in order to feed you, that means that I have to take some responsibility. That means that I have to know what I'm talking about to some extent. It scares the spit out of me, you see. And this is the reason why Bill said, I mean, Clifford and those guys said, if you just learn some text then you don't have to be sharp or quick or witty or any of this other kind of stuff. You just simply have to follow the directions that Bill gave you, and then be ready to step up. But the moment I recognized that I needed the men and women in this room more than they needed me, the more I realized at that time that unity was so amazingly important, that it was key. I'd fight a mountain lion barehanded to maintain unity. I'll do anything to make sure that we stay unified, because that's the only way that we're going to hold together and be able to do what we need to do. Guys, let me close with this. I love the fact that I'm sober today. The fact that I haven't had a drink or done any other stupid stuff for 34 years I'm so blessed to be here. But I got to tell you, the fact that I am able to at times alter the course of another man in this room is life-changing for me. That a crusty old bastard from Central Texas could say something and teach out of our basic text and watch miracle after miracle after miracle. That's some heady stuff. I will always be grateful that I'm sober, but I will be more grateful that this program allowed me to see with some clarity the way to alter the course of somebody else's life. And that's some heady stuff. As you get to be an old guy like me looking back on your life, it gets to be pretty cool. That's the reason why when I see young little future Texans like Lana in here, I keep thinking how cool and how blessed we are that she's here in this room. Imagine what the next 30 or 40 years of her life is going to be like as she changes and affects lives. That's going to be some heady stuff. I can't tell you how proud I am of y'all. Michael, the work you guys went through to put this thing together, I know from experience how hard that stuff is, and I'm honored to know you for darn sure. Thanks for asking me to come talk, okay?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Myers.